A very warm welcome to everyone coming out tonight in the cold. Thank you so much for coming. As I said, this is the 8th of 8 sessions we've done. And by the end of tonight, we will be somewhere up about 130 odd people who have been to those sessions over the last little time. And my name's David Smith. I'm president of Electrifying Bradfield. And I'd like to start in the way in which we start all of our meetings with, and that's to acknowledge the Darug and the Darramurrugal people who are and have been the custodians of the land that we're meeting on. And I want to pay our respects to elders past, present and becoming. Okay, so tonight really the idea is for you to be able to get whatever answers we're able to provide for you. Rod is the expert with IT in particular, and he's going to introduce you to a number of really significant websites that will probably help you even more than what we can. But neither of us are involved in any way in the renewable energy industry. We're not involved with making or selling or installing panels in any way. My background is in fact in earth sciences as both a teacher and lecturing at university in earth sciences, climatology, geomorphology, plate tectonics, soil science and so on. And Rod's background, well, you began building power stations, didn't you?
I did. It's interesting.
But you're not doing that anymore.
No, I studied engineering at university, worked with the Electricity Commission for a number of years, and then moved up into IT, which is where most of my career's been. So I guess the point is that we're just citizens who've been on this journey.
But we've both had, and the rest of us have had, a deal of experience with renewable energy. Not only solar, but other things as well. And I suppose we begin by simply saying that all of the people that I've got on the desk here who are writing currently about this stuff, like Saul Griffiths, for example, who is the advisor who's been to America, advising Joe Biden on the $1 trillion project that they're now engaged in renewables. He's also been advisor to Albanese in terms of the $40 billion Futures Made in Australia program that we're about to embark on. And he was also an advisor to Matt Keane, the previous Energy Minister in New South Wales government. Saul is an Australian, trained in University of New South Wales, electrical engineer, went on and did a whole lot of things in relation to renewable energy, now runs a group called Rewiring Australia. And is heading up a program to become the first postcode in Australia to go completely renewable energy through solar panels, and that's on the south coast. Anybody who's interested in reading about what we're talking about tonight, it's a really simple book, it's not difficult to understand, it's not technical, and it's full of pictures and illustrations and simple ideas. The other couple of books that I've got are more technical, but they're both saying exactly the same thing, and that is by Alan Finkel, who of course was the chief scientist before our present one, and Ross Darno, who's probably the best known energy economist in Australia, and they're looking more at why we need to do it in terms of Australia and the national economy. So it's not just a matter of you doing good things for yourself, it's also a matter of the whole business about rooftop solar is really, really important for Australia, and also it's really important for Australia's economy. The last book that I'll mention is a wonderful book by Yoel Gerges. Yoel Gerges is an international climate scientist. She's been part of the panel that's written the International Panel on Climate Change Reports, and she's also a wonderful Australian climate scientist. Lives on the north area of Queensland in the rainforest, and Humanity's Moment is a book that's basically about the heart, not only just the head, it's about the heart. And what I find about trying to convince people about doing things about Earth and the world is that you can't do it just by the head. you've got to do it by the hut, because that, in fact, she argues, and I agree with her, is the way that we connect with our natural environments and our animals and fauna. And she wrote the book because the argument in the book very simply is that the natural balancing systems of the Earth, which is basically the atmosphere and the ocean, are now completely out of balance. And the scientists are desperately trying to find what is exactly happening and what's going on. And I could talk for a long time about that, because that's part of the reason I got into the renewable journey that I've been on for over 20 years. However, what I want to start with is that every one of those people, and anyone that you read, basically says we're on a renewable energy journey. Whether we like it or not, it's going to happen. And the reason it's going to happen is simply because it's not about climate change. Most people who you talk to think it's all about climate change and how we do something about it. Well, that's really good. But the way I explain it is to say that these two things have fortuitously come together. That, for example, we didn't get rid of, the Bronze Age because we ran out of tin or copper. And we're not moving into renewables because we've run out of fossil fuels, unfortunately. We're moving into renewable energy simply because we've found something that is more efficient, more reliable, and a heck of a lot cheaper. And it's called the sun. It gives us 10,000 times the energy we need every year in Australia, all for nothing. So why on earth wouldn't we use it? So I'm going to talk about other reasons for why you should think about it. I don't know whether anybody needs to be convinced. Does anybody need to be convinced about it? No? Well, we did have someone last week who wanted to be convinced, so that's really good. Can I ask how many people are apartment strata dwellers? 1, 2, 3. Okay, all right. Well, we'll have a bit of a talk later on. So what we want to do tonight is I'm going to start off with doing some general things which are both pertinent to households and pertinent to strata. And then what I'll do is I'll take the three of you people on strata, we'll go to the back up there and we'll do some stuff specifically about strata and apartments, because strata is really a very significantly different ballgame. And there are some really important things to know about. Okay, what are the other reasons? Well, one of the main reasons is saving a lot of money. And everything that I've done in terms of my renewable journey with solar rooftop panels, when I put mine on, I was earning 21 cents a kilowatt. Now, of course, you'd be lucky if you earn 2 or 3. The other thing about that is it's all very well to have rooftop solar, but what about when you get blacked out? You're going to be blacked out just like everybody else. And so there are increasingly good reasons why maybe energy security through installing a storage battery at home is a really good idea. I mean, the point is that if you install rooftop solar and you link your appliances, like your dishwasher, your washing machine, your pool pump, for example. Some people are even linking their robotic vacuum cleaners, which they control off their mobile phone. If you link all that to the energy that you're generating during the daytime through your solar panels, then basically you're not paying for any electricity to be able to do that. Now that's all very well, but you'll probably generate more electricity than what you need during the day. I mean, if you think about it, most appliances, apart from things like maybe air conditioners and pool pumps, are not taking a lot of electricity at all tonight. So what do you do with that extra electricity? Well, in the past, a lot of people have looked at the business model of saying, okay, as well as using energy in my home, I'm going to export some off to one of the electricity. And as I say, a little while ago, people could make some really good money out of that. However, the whole game changed last week I don't know how many of you saw the article in the paper in the Sydney Morning Herald, which Rod and I have been expecting for quite some time. What it means is that from now on, you're not only going to get very little for any kilowatt energy you export, unless you export it between 3 p.m. and 10 p.m. at night. So, the idea is to start to think about how that changes the nature of what we might do. And that's what we've got to think about. So, for example, one way of thinking about it would be to say, all right, all I want is enough energy to generate during the daytime to run all of the appliances I need to run. But at night time, I'll still be connected to the grid and I'll use my lights and all the rest of it just off the grid. That's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is to say, well, no, what I want to do is I want to have enough battery storage at night time to be able to run what I need to at night time. And that means that I'm really not drawing anything from that central grid at all. Okay? The two case studies in that article in the Sydney Morning Herald are actually illustrating that. So the guy on the top here, all he's got is rooftop solar. He hasn't got a battery at all. And so what he's doing is basically either generating just enough electricity for what he wants, or else he's still prepared to put in some in the grid for very little. Or at certain times, maybe paying to put that extra electricity into the grid. So every state in Australia currently has got a law that basically allows your electricity provider, if you're sending electricity to them, to turn off your electricity, right, that you're sending in. So that's already there. But this is the next stage where what people are going to be doing is actually paying to do that. Guy on the bottom is actually a guy who we know. He's got an article on our website, and he's a smart man about renewable energy. What he's done is got a totally different business model. What he's doing is saying, okay, I'm putting in 3 batteries. One, which is going to provide enough energy for me to be able to run what I want to at that time. But I'm putting in another 2 batteries because between 3 o'clock in the afternoon and 10 o'clock at night, I'm going to make quite a bit of money. So that's what I mean about how, as things change, you need to think about the different ways in which you might think about your particular system if you're looking at it. Okay? Why else might you do it? Well, as I said, what we really need is we need as many rooftops as possible generating solar energy to be able to prop up a central grid that's collapsing pretty quickly. And some power stations are only running at 50% capacity. Most of them are very old, and then certainly some of them aren't terribly efficient. And there are big companies that are starting to get out of actually using fossil fuel production. For example, one of the ones last week is the biggest aluminium producer in Australia. They're getting out of fossil fuel at both their northern central coast plant and the same in their Gladstone plant in Queensland. And they're running completely on solar. So it's not just households that are thinking about it, it's some of the big companies are doing exactly the same as well. You might remember the power failures that took place in Victoria a couple of weeks ago, where you had something like 15,000 people who didn't have any power for a week. The only thing that stopped many more thousands of Victorians not having power was as soon as Origin Energy lost those 5 transmission towers and all of the lines, what they did was they diverted all of the rooftop solar energy that was being generated into the grid, and that's what's safe. The government and the energy ministers in their July conference, for example, one of the items on the agenda is how do we track the excess energy that's being generated from rooftops and be able to capture it to be able to put it in to the central grid. So it's not just a matter of you putting it on for your own sake, it's also a matter for what we're doing in Australia. And one of the issues about that is that both of the economists, for example, argue very strongly, as Albanese has, that Australia's economy, the future of our economy, depends upon us being able to generate renewable energy. And the reason for that is because our economy can't exist anymore in terms of digging it up and shipping it out and having someone else burn it, which is basically what we rely on and still are. What it's going to mean is that we're going to have to use our green energy to be able to do some refining of whatever products we're producing. And whether that's critical minerals, whether it's aluminium, whether it's steel, it's going to have to become green. Because already, for example, the European Union, the United States already have put tariffs on non-green imported products. In Australia, we have got a propensity for probably the best country in the world in some ways, in terms of renewable energy, in terms of solar and in terms of wind. And that's the way that we've got to move. Green hydrogen, people talk about, okay. Green hydrogen is probably going to be used for one thing or a couple of things. The most important thing is probably steel. It's really not appropriate for a whole lot of those. So increasingly it's solar and wind. So they're the arguments I would argue about why we should think about putting it on. How do we do it? Okay. Well, maybe I'll pause there and see if anybody's got any questions they want to ask about any of that. Yes.
Have you actually looked at red flow and the bromine flow batteries?
Yes.
And I'm not really interested in saving money. I mean, maybe that's a bit unusual. I'm nearly 82 years of age, so whatever I do, I probably won't recoup the money I spend anyway. So I'm more interested in supporting companies that are doing something a bit more unusual. And I know the bromine flow batteries are probably great for a house, but obviously you can't use them for transport. And I'm just wondering how I don't know if anybody who's actually put one in their home, but I'd be interested in doing that if...
You mean put in a red flow battery?
Sorry?
Do you mean put in a red flow type battery?
Yeah. They're a 10 kilowatt system, I think.
Yeah, it's...
Do you want to say a little bit about what they are?
Yeah,
well, maybe there's people who...
One of the interesting things that's happening at the moment is that we have this battery technology, lithium-ion batteries, and it's being used in cars, it's being used in your phone, it's being used everywhere we're thinking about storage at the moment, with the exception of hydro, which is our only other currently sort of major way to store energy. And it's in a way, it's really an inappropriate technology because it's so energy dense that it's perfect for anything that needs to move, where the weight of the battery is important. But if you're talking about batteries on a house or batteries on the grid, then these batteries that are called flow batteries have potential for freeing up a lot of the market, a lot of the manufacturing of lithium-ion batteries that we need in things like cars and trains and potentially boats and all the rest of it. So I think there's a lot of things. There's sodium flow batteries. That I think red flow is a vanadium flow battery.
I know they use bromine as the electrolyte.
So there's a lot of chemistries that have been looked at in terms of storing energy for those static. It's called static storage. They're a lot more efficient than building huge big dams for hydro type applications. But there's nothing really right now that I'm aware of you could go out and buy at a price that would be comparable to what you could put on the side of the house. But it's really interesting technology too.
Yes, so watch where it goes. When I looked, it was about 20 grand.
Yeah, it's
put enough solar on to make it worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to be a sort of an angel in that area and pay because you want to do it for reasons other than value, other than sort of value for money, then that's great. But they're not really something that the average person would look at right now. But in 5 years' time, they might well be dominating the household storage and grid storage market.
They don't burn.
They don't burn. They've got a much longer life. They don't degrade. Yeah.
I mean, battery technology is moving enormously. For example, some of the big stuff that's happening. That's what people don't realise. There's massive development going on in storage batteries in Australia, in lots of different places. Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia. And for example, in Broken Hill, which I know really well, got one of the biggest solar farms in Australia, but it also has just put in a massive compressed air battery. And the compressed air battery is going to be feeding the energy from the solar systems and driving the new mines just going in that they're building Broken Hill in terms of mining silver. That's just one example. There's a group in a British group that's based in Melbourne as the agents for this particular British group. They're making batteries out of salt water. So there's so many different chemistries in there going on at the moment that battery technology is going to develop like crazy. And Rod and I have been at the energy's conferences, the trade conferences, over the last couple of years. First year we went in 23, all the talk was about solar panels. Now it's all about batteries. And so the technology moves in terms of the issues that we're trying to do. Okay, so let's talk about, yes.
As we're talking about batteries, I also wanted to understand, because there's also technology where your car can generate and store.
Yeah, both of us drive EVs.
Yeah.
We both, charge them at home out of 240 volts, but what we've got as we charge them is a massive amount of energy.
Yeah.
And part of the discussion at the moment is how could we plug in our EVs into and earn money, if you like, at night time.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's even prototypes that aren't on the market yet of cars that have got solar panels built into them, and they're charged during the daytime, and then you come home, plug it into your home system, and it runs your home system at night time. Well, that sort of experimentation's going on, but we aren't there
So
yet.
it's not yet commercially
Not yet.
available?
No, in Australia there's a couple of issues. We have grid issues in terms of the regulations that it would be necessary to make it possible to feed energy back in. We made a really big mistake when we sold off the poles and wires in the power station, because now we're locked into some of the contracts and some of the relationships that we have there. But that's just the reality. The only state that has gone somewhere down that path is South Australia, and so there's, part of it is a state level regulation issue, and standards for this are emerging overseas, and Australia is watching them. The other problem that we've got is that almost no cars on the market now have. There's the technology called vehicle to load, which things like Hyundai's and some of the EVs have. Teslas have no capability of exporting power. Yeah. The only car in Australia currently that has anything that could approach vehicle to grid is the Nissan Leaf. Yeah. And that's what they're experimenting with in South Australia. So it's a really interesting space, and we will get there, but we're not there yet.
Because I was aware that it was being piloted last year in South Australia, but I didn't understand the restrictions.
That. We don't have any way of doing it currently in New South Wales, although it is being looked at.
Yeah.
2022 Energy Conference that Rod and I were at, we heard a paper by the Canberra University that was doing some research in a community in Canberra. But what it really came out of that research were identifying the problems that we've still got to deal with. Yeah.
And the world, it's not really an Australian, particularly an Australian problem. The world is grappling with these things, because there will be massive amounts of storage available. It's a difficult form of storage though, because for people trying to plan the grid's resilience, you can't assume everybody's cars are going to be plugged in and available to export energy when the grid might need it. So it's not like the battery on the side of your house, that's there, it will be available, and in many cases an operator will be controlling and will know how much charge is in that battery. But with the cars, we want to drive them as well and park them in other places. So it's a tricky one to get.
Any other questions? Okay, all I'd say is that probably if you're thinking about doing it, it's good to do it now rather than later. Simply because don't think necessarily that prices will gradually get lower. They did for a little while, then all of a sudden they peaked up. And the forecast that I have read just a little while ago was that if we all of a sudden get a surge of people who want to put panels on their roof with the supply chain problems we've got at the moment, then in fact there may not be enough panels available in Australia at the time you want them. And also, of course, the number of installers, we've actually lost a lot of installers. So therefore it might be difficult to get those people. So if you're thinking about it, the advice is to do it now rather than later. And also there's increasing arguments about why you should be thinking about batteries. For example, in 2022, there was one installation of battery in every 12 installations at Rooftop. In 23, it was 1 in 6. Information at the moment in 24 is that it's 1 in 1 or 1 in 2. So that's an incredible increase. There's also talk by Clean Energy Council, for example. Again, this will be on the agenda in July, is the possibility of a subsidy for household batteries as well. So keep your eye on those sorts of things.
We had the battery might have, our budget might have something about that, but it didn't materialise.
Yeah. Okay. The most important thing to begin with is to have a look at all of the different information that's available about the size of the system you might need, about what your electricity costs are, about the sort of things that you're thinking about you're going to be wanting that electricity to drive in the future rather than just simply now. And there are a whole lot of different ways that you can do that. What we're going to show you now is Rod's going to show you 3 sites.
4 sites.
4 sites, sorry. Yes, the first one we're going to show you is the council. How many people know, for example, that for a house, if you buy any sort of renewable appliance whatsoever, you can immediately get $500 back.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Pick up the rebate, so
Here you go, on the table. What I have to say is that we acknowledge an enormous amount of support from Ku-Ring-Gai Council. They have been fantastic in supporting us over these whole 8 meetings. And the other thing is, if you live in an apartment, how many people know you can get $4,000 back if you put a rooftop solar on your apartment? Okay, good, you've done some work. Okay, by the time that you have any sort of installer come to you and give you a quote, what we're saying is you should know all of the details about the system you want, you should know how big it is, you should know how much it's going to cost you. And that's what Rod's going to do now.
Thanks, David. Just before I get onto the website, one of the things I'd just like to say is that this point in history that we're in is pretty interesting in terms of what we think about cost of living. Because we're living in, people are living at the moment in what we call a cost of living crisis. Energy is a significant component of the cost of living. Petrol is a significant component of the cost of living. And prices of those things currently are driven by markets, and they can go up and they can go down, and that influences your ability to meet your budgets. We're moving to a world that is where everything will become electrified, and if you're generating your own electricity, then you're out of the whole cost of living fluctuations to do with with that energy. And if everything's electrified, if your car is electrified, your cooking's electrified, your heating and cooling is electrified, then you're in total control of the cost of the energy that you will use to replace both petrol and also the electricity that you're currently coming in from the grid. So
So Griffith argues, for example, the easiest way to cut the cost of living would be simply to give subsidies to put rooftop solar on every single house in Australia.
Yeah, it really is a very major anti-inflationary thing that you can do for your own life. So anyway, onto the websites. So one of the tricky things about solar and batteries, and the reason why I guess sometimes people don't go down the path, is that it's not like buying a car where you'll look on the websites and say, that car's got that features, that one's got those features, and you'll make a decision and you'll go and buy the car you want. Every single house is different, and so rather than kind of relying upon reviews and that sort of thing, which can be useful, you need to be in a much stronger position to understand what your house's capabilities are in terms of the roof structure, and you need to understand what your personal requirements are, as David said, in terms of the energy that you're likely to use going forward. So I think one of the main things about these sessions is hopefully arming you with ways of becoming educated. We can't tell you, we need a session with each one individually to look at your house and say, well, that looks like this, and we're not professional installers. So what I want to try and do is arm you with some sources of information which are independent, that will enable you to become knowledgeable enough to think about your own situation and make sensible, informed decisions about the sorts of systems that you might want to put into yours. And you might actually come out of that and think, well, my house is actually not suitable for a solar system. There are some houses that are just simply not suitable for various reasons. So I want to start just by going down the first site. And this is a site that you're probably already familiar with, but Ku-Ring-Gai Council put a lot of money into building a completely separate website aimed at sustainability and net zero. So this covers not just electrification, but also composting, waste, the whole kind of world of sustainability. All of these 4 websites there are QR codes on the handout, so you don't need to write down the URLs or anything. So underneath this Ku-Ring-Gai Council net zero site, there is a separate section for electrification. So this is talking about not only solar panels and batteries, but induction heating, heat pump hot water, which is another way that we can replace gas or even old storage hot water system with a much more energy efficient way of doing things. One of the key things about this site is that it's written for local people. There are lots of local case studies, and it's written for just average consumers in the community. So it's very easy to drill down into. The information is not particularly technical, so it gives you a good foundation. The second site is, that's interesting. The Australian government has put together a site called the Government Solar Consumer Guide, and this covers some of the same material that Ku-Ring-Gai's website covers, but 2 differences. Firstly, it covers a lot more kind of use cases, so it includes quite a lot of information on units, and it also covers things like policy and government planning. So if you want to drill down a little bit further into the climate side of things, the policy side of things, then this is a very good site. It's run by the federal government, but it's been the information in there is coming out of the University of New South Wales and various experts. So this is a really good place to have a look at. And I guess by getting a couple of different views of information, you often get things reinforced, and it starts to give you a good understanding. Part of this consumer guide, part of this site is the Solar Consumer Guide, and it's actually got a step-by-step. I know this is not all that easy to read, but there's a step-by-step process covering a lot of the main factors around choice of systems. So those 2 sites are very general information about solar. They're not really getting into your particular house, but they will give you some of the background. So the next site I'd like to talk to you about is this one. Of the 4 sites, this is the only site that's actually a commercial site. Solar Quotes is an organisation that was started by a CSIRO engineer some time ago. And their main purpose for existing is to connect you with accredited installers who they have worked with and get quotes back to you for your particular property. Now, there are a few really useful things about this site. One is obtaining quotes, but the other is that there's an awful lot of information about different products, so particular panels, particular battery brands, particular installers. They have reviews and also technical reviews of products, and they also have consumer reviews. So when somebody puts a solar system in through one of the Solar Quotes installers, they're encouraged to go back and give some feedback on what the experience was like and whether they were happy. So there's a rating system in there which is generated from reviews and also from technical experts. They're not going to charge you to do any of that. So all of the information on there is free. It's free to obtain free quotes. How they make their money is that the 3 companies who they ask to send you quotes will pay them $25 or so for each of those. So they make their money by actually having a charge to the installers who are looking to get your business. It's a really valuable thing early on in the process, I think, to use this. Or there's another site called Solar Choice, which is fairly similar. I just don't have as much experience with. You've got very little to lose by going in there and asking for 3 quotes. They will put you in touch with some. You'll get sometimes information will come to you purely just as an email, and it will be a sort of a specific kind of quote. If your roof and your situation is relatively straightforward, they probably won't need to visit the site. But with those three free quotes, even if you don't want to do anything at the moment, because it's completely no obligation, it starts to arm you with the sort of range of possibilities that might apply to your property. And you can use that information with your general knowledge that you obtain from the other sites to question those quotes. So I've done this a couple of times myself, and it's worthwhile just putting in a. They'll ask you for your address so they can look at your roof and your situation, and they'll ask for some information about whether you've got a UV or what sort of pattern of usage you've got. Out of that, those installers will come back with some quotes, and they won't all be the same. They'll have different ideas of what's the best way to do things. So that's a really good place to just start to find out what might work for your property with no obligation and no cost. They might come back recommending a particular inverter variety or a solar panel brand. You can go back onto the Solar Quotes website then and I should have mentioned, this is another kind of beginner's guide to solar, a bit like the council and the government consumer guide. So again, you're kind of getting information from different directions that should all empower you. But a key part of the site is the reviews. So there's reviews of the installers themselves. So if one of the installers comes back and says, well, this is what I would recommend, then you can go into here and have a look what other people thought about that installer. If they're recommending particular brands of panels or inverters, you can do the same things. There's an awful lot of information in here. The last site I'd like to show you is another site that's government run and comes out of the University of New South Wales. This is the most technical of the sites, and you kind of have to be comfortable playing with interacting with computer applications to use it, but it's a really, really powerful site. Sunspot is essentially a tool which is a free version of the same type of tool that the installers will use. So when an installer looks at your house, they will look at the shape of your roof and they'll use professional tools to work out the best panels and the best inverter and all of that. This is a free. It's nowhere near as sophisticated as what the installers will use themselves, but gives you some information so that you can actually think about, well, where do I think would be a sensible place to put panels on my roof? I should just in terms of the quote. So it's really important that there are things that you know about your roof or shading of your house Don't rely upon the installer guessing it. If you know that your roof has got an area that is shaded in winter or in summer, mention that. Give them as much information as you can about the circumstances, because every house is really a completely different kettle of fish. The height of the roof is no issue in terms of working at height safely. But with this one, you can start to look at how you think it might be sensible to lay panels out on your roof. So the way the site works, there's two ways you can use it. Put your address in, and you can simply, you can go through their whole process of giving them details of how much your electricity bill is at the moment. And then they'll ask you things like, do you have a pool? Do you have reverse cycle air conditioning? How many bedrooms in your house? How many people live there? All of those questions you can skip over if you want to, but at the end of the day, what's going to pop out of this is an estimate of the cost of the system, estimated cost of the system, and also what your annual savings are likely to be from that system, and what the payback period to cover the cost. So the more information you give it, the more likely it is to be a realistic estimate. But what I usually recommend is that you just, first time, just rush through all of that, because the fun bit is actually putting panels on the roof and see what it's all going to look like. And you can come back a second time and put more information in. So what we do here is you put in your address, it pulls up a picture of your roof. It's just a Google picture, so it depends a bit on how good Google's view of your house is. Once you've identified and you've got your rooftop nicely in the frame, you go to the next step. And it's a little bit unclear, but you see there's a whole bunch of little dots over the roof there. So because Ku-Ring-Gai Council have joined with Sunspot, and I think there's a fee that they pay to be a part of the Sunspot thing, Sunspot have actually used a LiDAR system from an aircraft to map the rooftops of the area to get a bit of an estimate of the slope of the rooftop, and that's obviously important in terms of measuring how the panels are going to collect sunlight. So where you see the dots are sort of warmer colours, oranges or reds, that's kind of indicating a part of your roof that Sunspot thinks is likely to be good for panels. And where there's sort of a bluer colour, that'll be south-facing areas and things like that, which there's not very much south-facing on that image. So your roof will have a different pattern of dots depending upon what it thinks. It's all just a guide though. You might know things about your seasonal variation of shadows and things that might make you think, well, okay, I can see why it's thinking that, but really I think the panels would go somewhere else. But anyway, you've got to that point, so you're starting to think about where panels might go. And then there are tools on there where it will actually let you simulate panels on your roof on each of the different orientations. The blue parts of the panels are the sort of bottom parts of the panels, so depending upon the slope. So you can see there that the panels on the right are actually facing towards the east. The panels on the other side are facing towards the west, so the blue sections are sort of down like that. So you can just start putting groups of panels on your house however you wish. And then once you've done that, it will go through and do a calculation. So this is that group of panels that I put on there is a 13 kilowatt system. That's quite a big system. At the moment, the sort of sweet spot for solar panels, for solar systems seems to be around about the 6.5 kilowatt. That seems to be a good figure for an average household. And it's generally an economical size to install. But that particular roof was so amenable to solar, I couldn't resist putting more on. So that was a 13 kilowatt system, and estimated cost is between $10,000 and $14,000. That estimate is wide because they don't know what your roof's made out. They don't know what's going to be required to put scaffolding in, or so. There's a lot of variation in that. And then it tries to calculate what your annual electricity bill will be after you put that system in, and the annual savings and the time it will take to repay. Now, because when I did this example, I didn't put any details about what electricity, how many bedrooms there were, whether I had a pool, whether I had an EV or whatever. So it's with that size system, it's essentially assuming most of the energy is going to go out to the grid. When you have a system on your house, that's sort of suitable for what you need it for, base, and it should be more reliable. When you get quotes back from installers, they will also make these estimates for you to try and encourage you to buy a system. So this just gives you another piece of information that you can use to hopefully ensure.
Argue with it.
Yeah, argue with them. They all know that you've got 3 quotes, so there's a competitive market there straight away. So this is it's a very well built tool. The other thing you can do on this is add a battery in your system. So if you are thinking that you might like a battery, well then you can add that into this equation as well. There's no real compulsion. I mean, the examples David gave earlier, you can have a solar system without a battery. In fact, you can have a battery without a solar system if you want. But one of the things to think about is that even if you think right now you don't need to go down the battery path, make sure that when your system is installed, it's at least possible to add it. Adding the battery is much easier than adding additional panels on your roof because nobody has to get up on your roof, and that's a significant part of the difficulty of putting the solar in.
And I'm working with someone at the moment from one of the other meetings, and that's exactly the problem I've had, is that when they had the rooftop solar panels put up, they didn't think about putting in a battery. And now the wiring that's got to go in to be able to connect the two is much, much more expensive than electric.
So make sure, there really is no reason why you would say to them, I would never want a battery. You know, I think just saying, I will want a battery, even if you don't want to do it now, make sure they know that you will want a battery at some point, because you probably will.
The other thing we should say is that in the past, a lot of people felt they couldn't do anything because of either shade or too steepness of the roof, okay? Both of those things now really can be overcome in most cases. There are very few roofs, even if they're very steep, that have those problems anymore. For example, I had a flat roof basically, or pretty much a flat roof. But my panels were actually on stanchions like that, right? And that meant that, but in fact, when they came to look at the structure of my roof, they said, well, you know, what we don't like is that your bearers for your roof are actually not as close together as what we would normally like. However, they were able to fix that, and I never had any problem with it. Now, of course, the panels mostly, if you look around at new panels that are being fitted, they're not sitting out 45 degrees from the roof. They're actually fairly close to the roof surface itself. I mean, sometimes you've got to have them angled, there's no doubt about that. So what that means is it means that there's not the same wind resistance, for example, that there was on my roof. As far as shade goes, and now we've got inverters that panels will turn on and off depending upon the sunlight that's there. So for example, in the old days, mostly people would say, well, you know, if you can't put the panels on facing north, then yeah, it's probably not real good. Well, now we've got people who are putting panels on their north, on their east, on their west, as well as some people who are even putting some panels on the south. And the way it works is they simply have their panels that are turning off and on at different times of the day as they're generating electricity. So that's the sort of way in which technology has moved to overcome a lot of the problems that there were when I first started. There's no doubt about that. And as I said, there will still be some routes, but they're getting less and less and less where you can't do it.
The key route that you can't do it on is if you're in a heritage property. There's currently no way. That may change because it seems a little bit odd that we can pull down heritage properties now.
There actually is an issue, there's a legal part of that about exempt development.
Yeah, but if you're in...
But it's a much more technical set of issues.
Okay.
Do you mean a heritage area?
No, heritage build...
Natural property.
Yeah, the heritage property, my understanding is that you cannot do anything with the roof. In a heritage area, you can put solar panels on as long as they can't be seen from the road. So that limits where you can put the panels. But this is kind of a little bit crazy in the modern world, but that's my understanding of the current situation. So if you're in a heritage area, one of the sensible things to do would be to call council and find out exactly what the current current situation. But the last time I checked, which was probably 6 months ago, in a heritage area, as long as they weren't visible, you were fine.
Yeah.
Can you overhang the ridge line? Can you go past?
I don't think so.
Because I've never seen any, and I can get 3 rows on if I can just go over around, you know,
I don't
300 mils.
I don't know.
Yeah.
One thing, I've never seen it.
No.
One thing to keep in mind that is important is that if you've got deciduous trees, or indeed, you know, gum trees or whatever, that might have the capability of leaves collecting underneath the panels. Leaves on top of the panels generally are not a problem because they will blow off or be washed off. But leaves collecting under the panels is not a good thing. It's not very difficult to include as part of the installation. It's kind of a mesh that goes around the panels to prevent that. So if you think that's likely in your case, tell the people you're asking for quotes for that that's the case, and I probably demand that they include it into the price. Much easier to do when they're installing it than if you go back later and do it afterwards.
Okay, let's sort of move on from there with a couple of other things. Okay, so now what you've got some idea from the sort of sites that was giving you about what you need and about how much it's going to cost. First thing to make sure is that whatever installer you've got is accredited through Clean Energy Council. Okay? Solar quotes, every one of them that comes off there have already been vetted. So you've got no worries with it. But certainly it's really important to check and make sure that that's the case. Don't necessarily go with the cheapest quote. And if it seems too good to be true, then it probably is. Talk to other people around you who've had solar panels put on and see what their experience is. See who they use. See whether they're satisfied with it and so on. So all of those things are important. Read the fine print of your contract that you get with the installer really carefully. Particularly look at things like the warranties they're giving you, for example. So, generally panels for 10 years. However, that is increasing as well.
Panels really 20 inverters.
Well, I was going to say they're 20 years, and one company that I read about the other day is 40 years. So, look at your warranties carefully. The thing that's most likely to go are your inverters. And so that's normally 10 years, isn't it?
I think it's still roughly 10 years on the inverter, but they tend to be an easier part of the system
To
replace.
Yeah, exactly. So look at your fine print really carefully. Make sure you consider your long-term uses, because retrofitting is going to be a lot more costly than if you do it up front. Okay? Even if you've only got in the back of your mind, as we're saying, you might do something else. I mean, the things to consider are batteries, there's no doubt about that. The other thing to consider is EVs. If you're going to be charging an EV and you want to fit in a fast charger, for example, I've just got someone who's put in a 6.3 kilowatt system, and part of it is in fact it's not a fast charger, but it's a faster charger than the 240 volts. But what that might mean is that you've got to have more or different inverters than what you would have had normally. Okay? We've talked about accreditation. Use companies that have been around for a long time. If they've been around for a long time and they're still in the business, then they're probably reasonably good companies.
Solar quotes will give you that information.
Yeah. And the first thing, before you do anything, is make sure you have a rooftop inspection. So that you have a look at what the structure of your roof is. The other thing that will vary will be what material is on the roof itself. So there's a difference between installing solar on tiles than what there is on a steel roof. And the prices for those installations may well be different. Okay, any other? One of the things we should explain though is you're likely to come across kilowatts and kilowatt hours. Okay, And it's important to know the difference. Do you want to explain the difference between those two?
Yeah, I mean, we've got unfortunate terminology here, and it is confusing. So when we're talking about the size of the solar system, we talk in terms of kilowatts, which is the rate at which a solar system can generate energy. And usually they're quoted in terms of their optimal, so when the sun is at the highest. So kilowatts is about the speed of putting energy into your system, or the speed that you're using it. So a kettle is a 2 kilowatt device normally. Kilowatt hours is an amount of energy. So we're talking about batteries, or indeed the price of electricity. We talk in terms of kilowatt hours because it's an amount of energy. It's 1 kilowatt for 1 hour. So when we're talking about batteries, we talk about how much the battery can store, and it's in terms of kilowatt hours, and that might be something like 10 or 13 or 15 kilowatt hours. There's an interesting proposal, because that terminology is so counter to the way we think. When we think about water flowing, we think about litres per minute or whatever, and we think about litres, and litres are essentially the equivalent of your kilowatts per hour in terms of energy, and litres per minute are really the kilowatts, because that's a rate. There's somebody proposed that we should change the name kilowatt hours to koalas. And that would be a really, really sensible thing to do, because then you could say my battery can store 10 koalas, and and my jar uses 1 koala per minute, or one koala per hour, or whatever. So it would actually, in our minds, it would work better, but I don't think that's going to happen somehow. So you have to kind of get your head around kilowatt hours is an amount of energy, kilowatts is a rate at which energy is flowing.
And normally, the ratio they work on is if you put in a 3.5 kilowatt battery, then you're going to generate around about 14 kilowatt hours of power. If you put in a 6.5, you're going to generate somewhere around about 26 kilowatt hours, right? And that's important in terms of thinking about the relationship between the amount of energy you're developing and what size battery you need to be able to store it. And going back to what I began with, in terms of the way you're thinking about how you're going to use the energy that you generate. So, whereas before, in probably the last half a dozen meetings, before that particular article came out, we were saying, well, get a bigger battery if you're thinking about trying to make some money through putting it into the grid. Well, we're not saying that too much anymore. You've got to work out.
Not a bigger battery, but a bigger solar system.
Yeah.
If you get a solar system that's too big, you're going to be exporting a lot through the day, and unless you've got somewhere to store it yourself, you will end up getting charged for the power that you're exporting to the grid. Talking about 1 to 2 cents per kilowatt hour, which doesn't sound a lot, but it's something that you're paying them rather than them paying.
And we also don't know how much it's going to be increased, the charge will be increased, because this is really a last gasp stand by the electricity companies. That's what it's about.
So that's what I was going to ask. What's the rationale for that?
Sorry?
What's the rationale for
The rationale-
being charged for?
It's straightforward business. The problem at the moment is that because there is so much solar energy going into the grid in the middle of the day, the wholesale price actually goes negative. So people like Ausgrid are actually in a position where they're forced to pay you for your energy, and then they have to pay somebody else to get rid of it, essentially. So it's the economic reality at the moment is that energy generated in the middle of the day has no grid value. In the future, once we've put in enough grid storage, then that will no longer be the case, because the energy then can be put into a big battery somewhere, or a red flow battery, or a hydro system, and it will have some use. But at the moment, we don't have enough storage to use it all, and so it's got negative value, essentially.
It's a way of managing the electricity grid until we get to the next step.
Yeah.
But it is probably the very best argument you can use for the deniers who want to say we're not producing enough renewable electricity. We're actually at the moment producing too much.
South Australia has been in this position for some time. South Australia is ahead of the country in terms of rooftop solar. It's very, very high. They often produce way more than they need in a day just from their rooftop solar. And so it's been the case for some time there. that if you try to export through the day, you will be charged. And so the systems there that have been installed for a while will actually have curtailment systems, so they'll actually switch it off. So rather than being paid, you're not generating it, but it's just better, economically more sensible to turn it off to the grid.
In fact, New South Wales is probably the worst state in Australia.
Do they lose their effectiveness as time goes on?
Solar
What's
panels.
what's the life of a solar
So
panel?
when we talk about the guarantee on a solar panel, it will be expressed in terms of how much that solar panel's output is allowed to decline before you can say that's not good enough. So they just naturally decline over time. Cheaper panels might decline 20% over their warranty period. Other ones might have a guarantee of say 10%. So it's a relatively small amount. And it's a small enough amount that you probably won't notice it unless something actually breaks.
And how are they recycled then?
There's a couple of ways. One of them is, I guess, unfortunately being destroyed and put into landfill. There is a significant market in Australia for panels that are still working, where somebody just wants to upgrade the system to be sent overseas to countries where they can be used. So when I looked at upgrading my system a couple of years ago, and that was a standard part of the process, was that the panels that I got would be removed and sent overseas to be used. So they will still have, even if they're down at that 8% level, they will still have a life, and there's a lot of people who will be able to use the energy that comes out of them. But at the moment, we don't have a great alternative to just destroying them, which is
All I say is, I had my panels for 20 years when I sold the house, and my panels were generating about as much energy as what they were when I first had it put on.
Yeah.
In your warranty, you will have a performance warranty, and it will be within that 10 to 20% range.
And are the ones that, according to the news, a lot of them are being manufactured now in China, the solar panels.
Yep.
China
So-
leads the world in
So
production.
how do they compare though with ones that, the lifespan, do they know yet? In regards to the ones that we had manufactured or had come in from
There's
the,
very few
from
I
manufacturers.
shouldn't say we don't agree with you.
no, from the European countries.
The Chinese are producing panels as good as anyone else. It's like anything, there will be cheap panels and there will be more expensive panels, but there's really nothing to suggest that you should avoid a Chinese panel.
No, so there is a difference. There will be a cheap panel and there will be a better
Yes,
panel.
yes,
So-
absolutely.
So the idea is then to try and find the value for money
Exactly.
in,
And that's Solar Quotes is quite a good site for that because they've got breakdowns of they call it what do they call it? Toyota, Rolls Royce,
Yeah,
they've got another.
Yeah.
And so they talk about that, and so you can have a look at the panels that are being recommended to you. Maybe a supplier an installer has come back with a quote that's using cheap panels but charging you as much for them as maybe with a better brand. So if you take your quote and go back to Solar Quotes and have a look at the panels they're recommending, if they don't specify, then ask them to specify or ignore the quote. They should be saying to you exactly what they're going to install. And then you can use that information to have a look at the reviews, technical reviews, and also the user reviews. These things can break, like any item they can break. It's getting easier to monitor that though with apps and things that can actually tell you how much each of your panels is outputting. So I would say like everything, most of us don't go out and buy Rolls Royces. Most of us don't go out and buy go-go mobiles or whatever you want to use in that. Somewhere in the middle will be a kind of sweet spot. It'll almost certainly be a Chinese panel because they totally dominate the market.
And the reason they dominate the market is because all the technology used to make solar panels today was discovered at the University of New South Wales 20 years ago.
say that again, sorry?
All of the technology that's used to make panels anywhere in the world was developed at the University of New South Wales 20 years ago.
But our
And what happened was that the Australian government wasn't interested in supporting them, right? There was a graduate Chinese student in the team that developed it. He took it back to China. So every panel in the world is basically being used with the technology that was developed there and was adopted by China. So anybody who says, well, I'm not going to buy Chinese panels because I don't like China, hasn't got much choice, I'm sorry. We produce very few in Australia. 2 of the companies in Australia have just left Australia.
Well, I think you raised a valid thing. I mean, there are obviously different qualities.
Like anything.
So regardless of where they're manufactured,
Yeah,
there's
that's
still
right.
different qualities.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Lots and lots.
But for example, my advice from a person who installs panels, someone desperately wanted German panels. And he said, yeah, I'm quite happy with German panels if that's what you want, but I'll tell you now, they're not as good as the Chinese panels. If you're interested, I will tell you about the latest research that's been done where they're able to make panels completely renewable.
Oh, that's
Yes,
interesting.
I'll talk to you about it.
Right.
You got a question?
Yeah, no, I want to make a statement actually with listening to what people have been saying, and as I said, I never worried too much about the money side of it. It was more an interest in technology and so forth. But recently, we put in a heat pump. That's cut our electricity bill in half. We're a bit of an empty nester mob, you know. We've got a 4-bedroom house and just the 2 of us that we share at least once a day. So we use a lot of hot water. And I've started to realise that hot water is one of the major power drawing activities in the house, right? So we put in a heat pump and it's essentially cut our power bill in half. We also have an induction cooktop.
Yeah.
And even though it actually uses more power while it's running, but you cook things much faster.
That's right.
So you have less time cooking. So that's cut our power bill as well. And really, for me to considering the council keep knocking me back on chopping the gum tree, or trimming the gum tree, we have a 30-metre gum tree, which shades virtually the whole roof. And for years and years we cultivated it. But now we want to get rid of some of it anyway. But then I would be considering whether it's worthwhile now spending the money to put solar on.
Yeah,
Because
I agree with
our power bill is
So low.
minimal sort of thing, you know. But that might be something that anybody thinking about, I'm not trying to talk them out of it, but, you know.
Yeah,
That's
I
an
will
issue,
wind
isn't
up the general and then I'll take these 3 people and then
Yeah, okay, we can continue. That's fine.
Yeah.
What we're going to do is, David's got a lot of information for people living in units in that very particular area, so we're going to separate there. But anyone else who wants to stay and ask more questions, I'm happy to.
What I want to finish with is, okay, how do you pay for it? Cheapest way is upfront. If you've got money to do it in cash, then do it that way. That'll be the cheapest way you can do it. Secondly, you can get loans. Every bank now in Australia has got loans for installing rooftop solar batteries and so on. Some of them are free interest, some of them are very low interest, right? The most important thing to do is to read the fine print really carefully, okay? Because there have been instances where the banks have said, yes, we'll give you the loan, but this is what we want you to do. We want you to pay so much off your mortgage, we want you to take out a second credit card, or whatever. In other words, there are conditions attached to it. But loaning is certainly another possibility, and there are some corporates that are providing loans as well. Third way of doing it is in terms of rebates. Unfortunately, the only rebate that exists at the moment federally is low income rebate. So what you do if you're getting the low income energy rebate as a pensioner or whatever, you then sacrifice that to be able to gradually pay off your system. The final way to do it is possibly through what could be a purchase power agreement or a virtual power plant. If you Google either of those things, you will find a number of companies that will come up that are providing those opportunities. What it means is simply this. They come and put your system in, they maintain it, they clean it and so on, but it's not your system. Okay? You don't own it. They own it. But what they're doing is they're generating your electricity, they've got an agreement. Now some of these virtual power plants, for example, are 100,000 different rooftops, right? All over the place. that basically are bringing all of that energy together. Because of the number of people they're working with, they can do really good deals with electricity providers, and they're basically feeding that into the grid somehow, and you're paying for your electricity that you're generating, if you like. Now, that happens until you own your own system, right? That's another possible way of doing it. You know, it's quite a different way. Once again, if you're going to think about that, look at your contract really carefully in terms of how much energy they're saying you're supposed to be generating, how much you're supposed to be putting, how much you're getting, how much you're paying, all of those sorts of things. All right, I'm going to take 3 people in about solar and apartments, and people on households. If you've got other questions for Rod, then please feed them. And what I'd like to say is that if any of you want to stay in touch with us and we can help you in any way at all, then please feel free to do that. Okay? On the handout, you've got a second page that basically says a little bit about us and about, you know, how if you're somebody who'd like to help us try and do what we're trying to do for you, then please come and join us.
Right. Anybody got any questions?
Yeah, there was a webinar a couple of years ago from the council. One of the things that you said was making sure that the installer was the one that supplied the solar system as well.
Yes.
Wasn't sure. Something about the warranty.
I'm not sure what that's referring to. The installer will be buying the equipment, which will be your panels and your. So I'm not sure what the supplier in that equation is.
Which is the warranty will always be through the installer. You don't have to go back on the supplier for warranty.
Are you in the manufacturer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I was in a situation where the company that installed my panels disappeared, they were a very large company, I think they were bought by somebody else. My inverter, they developed a problem within its warranty, and I was able to get that resolved. So I guess where there could be an issue is if both the installer and the company are no longer working with it. But I'm not aware of any particular issue around that, and I'm not sure how you would guarantee it, because the installers are certainly not manufacturers. Some installers might have relationships with importers, so I'm not sure about that.
Well, I mean, the solar. It's
maintenance or maintaining them. So things like hailstorms, tree branches falling, just handle just general maintenance. Is the stuff you have to do?
Yeah, it's an area where there are different opinions. If you're in a situation where there is no leaves falling on your panels, then they're generally self-cleaning. Hail doesn't seem to be a problem. My panels have been through many hailstorms. I don't know anybody that's had panels damaged by hail. They're tough. The only thing I'm noticing with my panels, I've had my panels on for about 13 years now, and I've done no maintenance on them at all. The only thing I'm noticing now is that there is lichen starting to grow up from the bottom where the water collects just on the lead, and I'm tempted to get up there and scrub it off, but I'm not allowed to do that. So there are companies who will clean panels, but it tends to be an expensive process. So the normal advice seems to be, unless you've noticed a definite decline in power, and I'm a nerdy sort of person, and I do record the output from my system, and I have been doing this since it was installed. And that's sort of now sort of almost getting towards 30 years. I'm sort of 75% way through my warranty period on the panels. There's so much variation year to year, month to month in terms of what gets generated, just because different number of cloudy days, different seasons. So my graph, I can't see any decline yet. So there's no reason why that bit of lichen there is something that I need to do anything about. I think it could be different if you're in a situation. My panels are up quite high. There's no trees above them, not nearby anyway. So pretty much anything that falls on them is just going to wash off the next time it's rained on. Deciduous trees or gum trees that might be shadowing, I think that could be a different situation, and it may well be something that you might want to ask the installer. I think in my situation, I kind of wish there had been some anchor points put onto the roof so that if I did need to do some sort of maintenance, then it can be done safely without scaffolding and that sort of thing. But most people don't do anything like that. Most people don't clean their panels regularly, and they just seem to work. In terms of the inverters, there's no maintenance there. Batteries also, it's a matter of responding to a failure rather than routine.
A simple sort of question, a couple of add-ons. First, say you've got something larger than a twig, like maybe the size of a cricket stump, falls on. Would you expect the panel just to shatter and you're in trouble? Say you've got some, like a gum tree or something like that.
I would imagine a gum tree branch falling on panels would cause them to break. I've actually never heard of it happening, but obviously at some point something's going to be big enough to break the glass, in which case you would need to replace that panel. But it's a fairly rare thing, I think. Certainly not my experience.
Different roof types, say people in slate roof, if you just like painter or a plumber or electrician or anything, they end up doing just about as much damage as good to the roof. And I guess people with slate roof with a lot of trouble with solar installation.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of the things that can rule out your roof as being suitable is just whether or not it's got the physical strength to take people walking on it for the installation period. Generally, once the installation is done, there's no particular pressure on the roof, but they will be drilling through your roof, so there is potential for leaks in the roof. That's something that you want to make sure is covered in whatever contract you have with the installer. So, because they're going to come there on a sunny day, they're going to put your panels on, and it'll all be working lovely, and the next time you've got heavy rain, you might notice some leaks. You want to be able to get back to them and say, can you come back and fix the leaks? So that's a very real potential problem that can happen. It's also possible that you might have tiles that are getting old and maybe one or two cracked while they're being installed. Again, you want to make sure that the installation process covered those and there's a warranty against that sort of damage during the installation.
Another roofing top is also present, say, garaging with some quick locks at the time where I think it was a minimum gradient, like 10 or 12 degrees or something. So it's quite water tight with low gradient. And you mentioned rubbish can get under it, and I was trying to imagine if leaf mat foliage and debris builds up. You said there was something like a mesh.
Yeah, you've probably seen that mesh that people sometimes use on their guttering to prevent leaves falling in. So it's what I've seen just walking around looking at installations. They'll use something like that around the edge, which seals. And if you've got like a corrugated roof, it'll be profiled with corrugation. So most systems won't bother with that sort of protection. But if you had trees that were above it, and likely be dropping leaves, it feels to me like it ought to be a relatively inexpensive addition to your installation to prevent things getting underneath it, because that's where the electricity is, that's where the power's coming out. So things on top of the panel, they will reduce the output of the panel somewhat until they blow off, but they're not going to do any real long-term damage. But you don't want stuff, particularly dry leaf matter or anything like that underneath it. It's a little bit damp at times, so then you're potentially exposing something until it starts to break down and then becomes some sort of fire risk.
So can you hose underneath them?
It's not recommended. I know fire brigade won't hose panels, even at night, interestingly. Their policy is not to put hoses onto panels. It's all waterproof, so when they're out in the rain, so they have to be waterproof. But I guess there's a certain amount of the design which assumes the water is coming from the top rather than underneath.
Just on a low grading roof, sometimes it may, the leaf matter that's moist may not have sufficient gradient to proceed.
Yes.
The government.
Yes, if you're getting build up on your roof, then I guess it's a low grading roof. It's a little bit safer to actually get up there yourself as opposed to do cleaning. If I had panels on a mitigated used to have them on a low grading roof, then it's relatively safe to be up there. You can actually scrub things off the front and sweep off around them. You do want to think about this. If you've got a situation where you think that a collection of leaf matter or twigs or whatever might be an issue, make sure that the installer knows that you think this might be a problem, and then you need to be happy that they've taken it into account adequately, so that you're comfortable that either you can maintain it yourself if it's a low gradient and it's relatively easy to get onto your roof. Although I'm not recommending anybody get on their roof, but there's a certain amount of maintenance that you can do yourself if it's a safe situation. But if you're on a graded roof, then you want to try and make sure that you're preventing problems rather than any sort of maintenance.
One of the answers was slightly struck, so that access underneath for any cleaning may be possible.
I'm not sure what you mean. What sort of strut?
Oh, I just mean like angle.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Rather than flat.
Yeah. So there's actually two arguments for putting it on an angle. On a flat roof, people almost never used to have them flat to the roof because it's actually not very effective in terms of solar collection. These days you do see them flat on flat roofs because the panels themselves are so much cheaper that you can put more on to give you the amount that you need. Having one an angle would certainly make cleaning easier, but it also makes wind blowing significantly harder. So I don't think I've seen a system go on that where the panels are elevated for a very long time. Yeah.
Somebody actually suggested that you could concertina the panel.
Yeah.
It was like
I've seen
installed
systems
like
like
that.
Yep.
For maximizing the sun. Yeah.
Yeah, in the old days, as David said, north was king. You want your panels facing north. Partly it was to do with inverter technology at the time, but this idea of panels being concertina with an east side and west side is actually a really good way to do things. It means that each of those panels is not going to generate as much as if they were facing north, but it means that they're going to be getting a much broader range of solar. There's a Australian company called 5B who installs whole big grid scale systems in exactly that way. They manufacture them in a factory where they're all concertinaed up completely flat. They ship them to where they're going and then they just concertina them out. And it's a really interesting company called 5B.
5B.
5B, yeah. But that's grid scale solar, not household solar. But yeah, I think the idea of having concertina along a north-south ridge line sounds to me like an efficient way to do it. I'm not an installer, there may be reasons why that's not done.
Because I'm just saying, if you're saying if they're at an angle, there's a wind issue. Don't know what that would.
So you mean concertina with no roof?
Yeah. I don't know how they do it.
Other than a grid scale systems, I've never seen that. Yeah, it might be just about. Because part of this now is all about economies of scale. So the racking systems they use, the panels themselves are all intended to be installed quickly, efficiently, and cheaply. And so as soon as something's kind of out of the norm, it's probably possible, but it just becomes a lot less economically viable. Ask the question, it'd be interesting to see what comes back.
And this is a very interesting question, but my understanding is that the EVs charge with DC current.
All EVs will charge with either AC or DC.
Oh, okay. Well, is there a standalone system? So imagine you're a farmer in somewhere out of the bush, you put your EV under a carport shed, and just put it on the roof. In short, the question is, the inverter changes it to AC, and then you're changing it back to DC to put into the car. I mean, so you're changing it twice,
Yes.
is that just in such a simple system like a farmer would buy, and it's a standalone on their carport, on their tractor, or shed, where you can just get DC, including DV.
I can think of no reason why not. I've never heard of such a system. And I don't know.
Is it what caravans use? I mean, I'm that ignorant.
Caravans tend to use the low voltage DC,
12 volt, yeah.
whereas EVs are up around 400, now talking about 800 volts DC.
But it is DC, right? The fast charging would be DC.
Fast charging DC, but you're not going to be doing fast charging from solar panels. You need a massive amount of range.
Yeah, but still
And-
trickle.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing to think about, because if you put 10 panels together in series, you're getting up to hundreds of volts of DC. So there's no reason why you couldn't have a box between that and the car, which charges the car DC, but I don't know of such a box existing. The efficiency of converting AC to DC and back again is actually really high. It's like in 90%. So there isn't a lot of loss in that conversion. So if you were doing that, I'm sure the cheapest thing to do would be to put the panels on your shed, put a low-cost inverter, convert that to 240 volts AC, and just plug it in and trickle charge. You charge the car, and you're probably losing maybe 10% of the power that you generated by doing it.
Does anyone have like a standalone system just for an EV?
I don't know, maybe. You wouldn't need to be standalone as long as the inverter is converting that to 240 volts. The car's not going to care whether it's on the grid or not. Most inverters, it's changing, but in my system, for example, if the grid is not operating, the inverter is not operating. So even though my solar might be pumping out power, if there's a blackout, the whole system shuts down. Modern inverters, though, are what's called grid-forming inverters, and they can actually keep themselves alive while the grid's down. There's a whole bunch of safety issues around that with people working, but if you want to have a battery backed up system for your house so that you've got power when the grid's down, then it needs to be able to generate electricity without the grid there. So the situation we're talking about is exactly the same as that. There's no grid there, but I've got an inverter that's generating 240 volts AC, and I'm just going to plug it into my car, and the car won't know that there's any difference to the grid.
One of the other questions was in terms of that, you've obviously heard about the disadvantages in terms of the cons of it is mainly just potential, like you said, leaves gathering underneath. There's no risk of like fire or things like that.
I couldn't say there's no risk. I mean, it's an electrical device, but I'm not aware of any house fires that were caused by solar panels. I'm sure if you Googled that, you would find out. I mean, one of the areas people are concerned about fires is batteries. That's much more so than solar panels. And EV battery fires is something that's a topic at the moment, but in Australia we haven't had one. In the company called EV FireSafe, which is an Australian company that monitors fires, and we haven't had a single fire in an EV in Australia that was caused by the charging of the EV. All of the fires have been related to the EV being involved in an accident, or having some damage to the battery, and then there is a significant issue both in terms of fire and also in terms of the response to the fire is quite different. This is all, it's all part of the transition we're going through. People, one of the key areas that is being worked on at the moment is trying to make batteries that are inflammable. You might have heard of solid state batteries. That's the thing that burns in the battery is a liquid electrolyte, and they're trying to replace that with no liquid electrolytes, and those batteries should be essentially impossible to catch fire. Batteries that are currently in cars can catch fire, but in Australia at least there haven't been any cases of it causing damage while people charge. It's a different matter with electric bikes, where some batteries are made to a much lower quality, and they have been causing problems with fires. But cars, we haven't seen that at this point, and very few in America as well. In fact, since 2010, when the EV starters sort of take off in numbers, there've only been about 400 battery fires in the whole world since 2010. So it's a really, really low risk. And I think you could say incredibly low risk for your house while it's in your property.
I just want to understand a little bit about the excess power you get from they talk about charging you when you put it back on the grid. Does that mean that you have to do something with all the electricity that's generated on your solar panel? Or can you just send it down into the ground somewhere?
The way that they're normally connected up, it goes out to any. So let's say you don't have a battery. If your panels are generating power more than you are using in your house at any point in time, then there will be energy being pushed out to the grid, and that energy. So there are a few caveats around that story. So the Ausgrid currently is saying that the fee will be about 1 to 2 cents, but they're also saying solar systems smaller than a certain size, and I think it's around about 3 to 6 kilowatts. They haven't actually released all the details of that yet, but they are saying this is going to happen. So if you put it on a solar system that's appropriately sized for your house, then you may not even get hit by the charge at all. But what you won't be getting is paying for the energy that's going out to the grid when it's negative wholesale price. The main thing they're concerned about are ecosystems that are much bigger than household needs, and that makes exporting significant amounts of energy every day at a time when there's no market for it.
Yeah, no, what I was really interested in though is, do you have to do something with the electricity that's coming from your solar panel?
Do you mean do you have to make a decision about what?
No, do you each day
Get
generate so much
elsewhere.
electricity? Yeah.
Either spending or sending it somewhere useful.
Yeah, I mean, if you can find a use for it, like you've got a pool pump that you can put on a timer, then that's a great way to soak up energy. I have heard about people talking about just putting all their lights on, but
That's
it's not very much. But
I mean,
the question really is, do you have to do something with the electricity? As I said, when you just have an earth wire that just...
no, you are connected to the grid. You can disconnect yourself from the grid.
So the alternative would be just to turn the panels off. Is that what, you not do that either?
There are isolation switches that you could disconnect the panels, but that would be a very manual process.
I'm just trying to understand how it works.
Yeah, I think in modern systems there may well be ways that you could turn your panels off, and there may well be ways that you can say you want to disconnect from the grid.
Generally you do. That's right.
Yeah, generally you do. And so it's part of why it's useful to just think about exactly how much you're likely to need.
I imagine once that becomes into effect, there'll be some enterprising people that will create some kind of a device, right, which will soak up excess. No doubt, right? If not, I mean, someone's going to think of that.
The question is, what is that device? I mean, that device is a battery.
It is a battery.
I mean, otherwise it's just wasted energy. You might as well be storing it in something like.
Well, you might as well, but probably some device can be cheaper than a battery.
Yeah, maybe. Hopefully we'll get through that phase.
Yeah. But that's actually positive that they're saying is, they're really targeting excess, oversize, for the average. It's a bit like if it doesn't affect the average size, and that's great.
Have a look at, that was a Sydney Morning Herald article, so you could have a look at the article. In the article, they did actually say a size, I think, but it was all very preliminary.
because I suppose, like you say, the previous advice was very much, put as many panels as possible, but if, like you say, you have no control over the excess and you don't have a battery, you're going to now be charged because it's going to go back in.
That's what it looks like. I was agree with What this is...
Like counterintuitive to incentivize people.
Yes, well, I agree, but it's all part of the fact that we sold off those companies and they need to actually make a profit. What it's going to do, I would expect, is change the number of people who are putting batteries on just as a normal part of installing solar quite dramatically. Because not only does that eliminate that, because you can use your energy, but you'll be using it at a time when you'll be paying much higher rates for the energy. So it makes good sense. And there are also the guy who's actually in this article, the local guy, Peter Boston, one of the things he's doing, the reason he's putting more battery on than he needs is because there are companies who are actually contracting with users to buy and sell energy at wholesale rates. So what he does, he's a very interesting guy. What he does, he's actually able to charge his car at those times when energy is negatively priced in the wholesale market, and he is getting paid to charge his car because he's soaking up negatively priced energy. So it's a really kind of odd situation at the moment, and it will continue to be odd, and we don't know where it's going to end up. But one thing is for sure, we're going to need more grid-scale storage to soak up more of this energy. But a lot of the storage, I think, is actually going to be not grid-scale, it's going to be on people's houses, because before that mess is solved, people will solve it themselves by putting a battery on big enough, A, to do what they want, and B, maybe even to make a bit of money out of it. I know David said that prices might not come down, and that's certainly true with panels, but the price of batteries probably will. The technology there and the ramping of that infrastructure to produce batteries is happening at an extreme rate. Australia needs to be a bigger part of that. We need to be producing batteries, but around the world there are battery factories being built. The IRA in the US has generated a massive investment profile for batteries being made in the US. So the price of those batteries will come down, and they're coming down just as changes in chemistry will come down. Lithium mining is being around at such a pace that the price of lithium is going up. So batteries will continue to get cheaper. Whether or not that's, you've got a bit of an equation about how long do you wait versus when you start getting the financial benefit from all of this, and that's a difficult thing to predict because nobody has a crystal ball, I suppose. But I would say the sensible thing to do at this point is probably to consider having a battery installed when you put your system in, or definitely make it an easy thing to do in a year's time or 2 years' time. And you then kind of get the situation where you've covered yourself against the possible increase of that rate. And then if the price of batteries comes down further, you have to think about adding a second one. They tend to be relatively easy, as long as you've got real estate somewhere that's sensible to install it. They tend to be an easy thing to add on to.
Sorry, with the batteries, is it true that they're going to be in a shaded area, they can't be in the direct sunlight?
I've seen them in direct sunlight. I've seen them in direct sunlight.
Is that light?
Yeah, I would say if I was putting a battery on and there was any chance of it being in direct sunlight, being in like western sun, I'd be putting some shading over it. I think it's a sensible thing to do. But I'm not sure that there's any requirement to do that.
Okay.
But I mean, they're an electrical device that is generating heat. It's a relatively small amount of heat. There's only about 10% loss in there. So it's a relatively small amount of heat, but nothing likes getting hot. So I tend to try and shade it if it wasn't naturally shaded.
So you mentioned that there is so in terms of a rebate, I know Ku-Ring-Gai Council gives you $500, but there's no other rebate?
Oh, there's a very big other rebate, but it's all.
But is that means tested?
No.
Okay.
The main rebate on solar is a thing called the Small Technology Certificate Scheme that the federal government has. So all of that happens as part of your quote. So the
So it's already inbuilt in.
It's already inbuilt in the price. Yeah. Other than the low-income energy rebate, the only other rebate I'm aware of is the $500 from council. Be aware that has to be applied for in advance. You can't install your system and come along and say, can I have my $500? The reason for that is really around their budgeting, because that's coming out of rates. It's not something that they get reimbursed from anywhere. So when you're thinking about putting a system on, and I don't think you have to have the final details, but just apply for that rebate. Once you've got your system installed and you've got your invoice, then you can go back and say, okay, here's proof that I did it, and they'll give you $500. that applies to a bunch of other things as well, actually, like heat pumps and things like that. So it's well worth keeping in mind. The only thing you have to agree to for that $500 is that council can access your energy usage numbers from the Ausgrid. And the reason that they want to do that is that part of council's net zero policy involves not just council being net zero by 2040, but it also involves trying to bring the community on a net zero journey. And so they want to be able to demonstrate that these rebates are actually encouraging people to put solar on, and they have had this effect on that consumer's bills. So only at an aggregate level, not down at the potential level. So other than that, it's free money, essentially.
Would you know off the cuff the standard size of the panels, how many panels you would need for what you mentioned, the sort of sweet spot, 6.5 kilowatt, 26 kilowatt hour?
So panels tend to be around about 250. It has been going up. Panels have been getting slightly larger. Depending on the shape of your roof, they may use a smaller panel to fit in better numbers. So if you thought from somewhere from 250, the most expensive panels are up to 400 watts now. So let's say work on 300, on basis of 300, so that's going to be 20 panels, I think? 20 times 300, 6,000. And they tend to be about a square metre.
Curious about your EV, how effective is your solar system in charging the EV?
I put my system on when 3.5 kilowatts was the largest system you could install, so I actually get a very little benefit in terms of charging my car. We do tend to do what they had suggested, and we tend to run dishwashers and washing machines and things like that through the I don't have a battery at the moment either, so I'm exporting some power pretty much every day. If it's a sunny day and the car's at home, I will definitely plug in to soak up the solar that we're using, but my system's not really big enough to be effective in that area. But to be honest, I haven't really noticed a significant increase in my power bills anyway because of the EV. We drive maybe 30 kilometres a day on average, and that's a relatively inexpensive amount of charging to do. So I have noticed the reduction in what I'm paying for petrol though. Anyone else? Yes?
They have to install the system. Do we have works after to monitor the system?
Not that you have to do. I think, again, my system is very old, so I don't have a smartphone app that I can look at and see what it's producing. I've got to walk outside and have a look, so I don't monitor it really at all, to be honest. I know that if it's sunny, I'll be generating about 2 kilowatts, and that's a good time to plug the car in. But I do know a lot of people who've put modern systems on where they can see the output of every single panel, what it's doing right now, and you can kind of get obsessed with that. I think it's kind of another kind of fun technology thing, but there's nothing that you have to do. You can just let it run. As long as this issue of paying to export might make people a little bit sort of follow things a little bit more, but we still don't know exactly what that's going to look like. But it will happen at some point, and there will be a charge. So if you want to just install a system and let it do its thing, then that's fine.
So just in relation to that, if you go away for 2 months or something like that, you just switch it off, or does it just let it run into the grid?
I've always just let it run into the grid because I get paid a little bit of money to do it. So that's also something, I hadn't thought about that, but it's a really good point. That will increase the amount that you'll be sending into the grid because you've got very little ability to soak it up. It's all the way. It's an interesting point. I think a bit more powerful.
My brother-in-law came, he's from England, and he was here with his smartphone now, solar panels back in the
Yeah.
When it was sunny, he was here, and he said, "Oh, I've got to put the robotic lawnmower in." And that came to me. These things on from Sydney.
Yeah.
So you can do it from a distance.
Yeah, so they're all just
He was totally obsessed. He looked every day to see what he was making. Trouble, but he loved it.
Yeah, well, I mean, if people are doing that in the UK, which doesn't have the level of sunlight that we
Very
have,
excited about his son. He brought us a couple of wasn't there?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.